I think we're live now.
Sorry?
I think we're
We're
live
live?
now. Yep.
Let me check. Why is it I don't see myself? Yeah, I think we're live. Let me check.
So
Yeah.
should we wait since it's just the three of us?
Yeah,
Or
we are definitely live now.
we'll just
All
wait
right.
for 2-3
Yeah,
minutes.
let's still wait for 3-4 minutes. Even Mafuza is supposed to join in, and then let's just hope the mentorship folks remember we we have our talks meeting this week. Lucas won't be joining us today, as you already know. Mafuza should be joining in a few minutes, apparently. So let's just wait for a couple more minutes to see if the rest of them join, or else we will continue with the discussion anyways. By the way, Hridesh, have you seen this? The call for proposals for the Bangalore edition of the Async API conference are out. They're open now.
Yep.
Yeah.
I was submitting a proposal for this.
You have the proposal ready already?
Yeah, I was working on it for a while. So Fran helped me out with the
Oh.
proposal. Lucas helped me out with the proposal, like topics. Then Alejandro helped me out with a little bit of topics.
You know what my topics talk like one of my submissions title is gonna be? It's gonna be the founder of async API doesn't know the implementation of async API.
Is that a shot at
I,
Fran,
I,
or is that a shot at Lucas?
it's a direct shot at Fran, and this is something he gave he gave to me by himself. Uh, Earlier we had this discussion where we were talking about topics we need to cover for uh, interactive learning path. So Fran was telling me that you know uh, people usually work with Kafka. They also work with cloud events. So in async API, we have this thing called traits, right? So he knows that traits exist, what they do, how they work, how to implement them. But it was in the async API conference London edition, which took place last week, where apparently one of the speakers, they implement. Yeah, see, Fran is listening. Yeah, I don't care, Fran. I want you to listen to this. So just like you listen to him giving you a presentation. So basically, someone demoed how they can solve the problem of working with both Kafka and cloud events using traits, which Fran had no idea about, even though Fran is the one who developed traits in async API. So yeah.
Do you remember the meme that you need 10 years of experience working with Kubernetes, and Kubernetes has been around for 8 years?
I
Yeah.
know that.
I think it was
So
another rendition of that
funny,
meme.
it was funny that Fran had the problem. Fran had actually built it, but Fran didn't know how to implement it to solve it. I'm still junior in async. Okay, so if Fran is supposed to be the junior in async API, where does that put me and Tridesh in the ladder?
Level -1. I think we can start because
Yep,
it has
I
been
I
some
also
time.
see Tuli in the call right now. I'm just waiting for her audio to connect. I see Tuli is also here.
So since it's just four of us, do you have any specific questions, Rohit, that you want to ask? Because I do have some questions that I want to ask.
Then I
But
think you should first go with your questions, and then I will fill you in with the details as to what happened in the earlier discussion.
correct.
So do you have, yeah, so I think you should first shoot your questions.
Correct.
Go ahead.
So this was one of the issues I raised in async API, which was in our Spec 3 version, right, which is our document. There is
Mm-hmm.
both YAML and there's JSON. There are
Yeah,
basically two
two
types of
languages.
languages, two languages, which I don't think is necessary because even with YAML, a JSON parser can pass YAML, and a
Yeah,
YAML parser pass YAML. So rather than us having two languages, let us just maybe make one language. Maybe just focus on YAML. If there's a necessity for JSON, we can do JSON. But that way, we would save up a lot on the length of the document. We'd save a lot on uh, simplicity of the document. So this was one of the proposals I wanted to propose. If no one is working on that, they try to take a nab at this and make sure all the things are either into YAML or JSON. Lucas
basically,
with YAML. So
you are you like suggesting we standardize the language we use across the
until unless
platform?
it's necessary. Yep, because sometimes you need JSON, and that is definitely a case. But we can, by rule of thumb, just focus on YAML when we're writing examples for our async API documentation or async API specs. We can just focus on YAML because
Because it's
that is
shorter.
the case. Yep, that's the case for Southpit 2.0. It's more human interpretable, or it's more human friendly.
Yeah,
So
there are
I just something
no
that I
brackets
propose.
to
Yep.
deal with. There are potentially no brackets to deal with.
Yep.
Uh,
So that was my question or proposal, and if
but
I'll be happy to
my
take
question
care of
is,
this.
which, so you are saying you are more inclined towards YAML? Well, Fran, what do you think about it? I mean, you are the subject matter expert. You are supposed to take a call on this.
Hmm. I think that for the sake of simplicity in your case, while writing docs, you can just write it in one of them, say YAML or JSON, doesn't matter. since they can be converted to each other, then in the docs we can have it like automatically converted, right? So you maintain it in one, but it's in the website it's shown in YAML and or JSON. I think it's important to keep both because actually the real format of JSON of async API is JSON, is not YAML. So in the parser, when we see YAML, first thing we do is we convert it to JSON. It's the first step.
Okay.
And we only handle JSON. So YAML is just for the human, let's say, for the human layer, let's say, for
Yeah,
simplicity.
it's more
right?
human readable.
Yeah, for readability, exactly. I agree. I also prefer YAML over JSON for readability, even to write it as well. But it has its own issues as well. Like there are certain things like yes, the word yes and no are treated as booleans, as true or false. So so if you type something like whatever yes, it is like assigned to true, so not assigned to the word yes. So it has its own issues. It has issues where I don't know, like some if you type a number, it's considered a number, but if you type a number point another number, it's still a number. But if you type other point, for instance, then it's not a number, it's a string of numbers. So it's not an issue actually, but some people don't realize or don't know, and it can become a mess to get familiar with it. So many people, for these reasons and many others I don't remember right now, some people hate YAML. Right? So yeah, but some people hate JSON anyway. I mean, to write brackets, as you said, and even more than the brackets, I would say it's a double quotes on each key and each value and so on. So you have to type the double quotes all the time. So, but it's to type. To read, it's fine, but to type, it's a pain. So yeah, you can probably keep it. Keep it. Just writing one, and then on the UI we show it in the tool options. And so people, if someone is using JSON, they can just copy the JSON value and paste it. If someone is using YAML, they can copy the YAML and paste it.
Wait, we can do that? I mean, is that possible that we have both the code examples in the document that we submit, like as writers? Let's say me and Hridesh, we submit two individual documents where both of us have the same code example, basically the same working, same implementation, just in YAML and JSON. So is it possible that when the user, any user, when they come onto our website to view those documents, only one language code example is displayed? Like if they want YAML, only YAML is displayed, or JSON. Does that work that way, or both the examples will be shown?
You're muted, Hridesh.
So both of them are shown, right? But then there's an option. So you can do a switcheroo where you just have
Exactly.
YAML,
Yeah.
but that would require more understanding of how our parser generates, or how a technical parser generates and creates content and converts your Markdown files into React files. So a simple and efficient solution would be to add both of them. And Fran clearly mentioned some great points about benefits of YAML and JSON. So I would I would prefer to keep both of them in Spec 3.
No, my question is, I think last month you already opened a discussion, right, regarding the same, whether we should be using YAML or JSON in the code examples. I think we already had like an answer as to what we will be using going forward, at least for the docs, because I can't see, to the best of my knowledge, I think we need to have only one code example. I mean, in one language, not in two languages. Like let's say we're writing a document on adding server variables, and it has, let's say, 3 code examples in the document throughout the document. Then all the 3 code examples need to be in YAML or JSON, any one language. And we agreed that we will go with the same language because continuity and standardization across the platform. So I don't know, is it YAML that we chose to go with last month? YAML, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
But I just
So
wanted to still hear Fran's feedback on this.
Wait
I believe
until
Lucas commented.
wait until we release version 3, and then probably one more year. I don't think I'm going to propose anything yet, but my idea was to propose a third language. So
another language isn't it enough that we already have two on our hands? But which one though? I'm curious as to which third language.
just custom one is it's probably something looking more like a programming language and less like a YAML or JSON. So something that will look more like GraphQL schema language or something like that. It has like as an example, it has curly brackets, but it doesn't have mandatory
Indentation.
mandatory indentation. It doesn't have mandatory double quotes like JSON. So it's like a mix in between in between the two. It's probably more similar to JSON, but without the pain points of JSON. Yeah, there are already languages that are close, like GraphQL schema language is one of them. There's another one. I don't recall the name now, but yeah, there's an open source language similar to this, and it was created as an alternative to JSON and YAML. I mean, in the end, it's all gonna be compiled down to JSON.
So basically, you're saying once version 3 is out, and in the coming year, you want to propose a third language, which is just the right mixture of YAML and JSON, just to confuse them all. Awesome.
I lost you for the last 10 or 20 seconds. So
I said, so coming next year after the version 3 of Spec is released, you wanna introduce or propose to introduce a third language, which is the perfect mix of JSON and YAML and confusing enough for everyone. Awesome.
Correct. So the idea is to confuse even more people.
Awesome. Good job.
No, I mean the idea is to allow us to. Yeah, some people don't like. We found that something that is funny that, I mean, developers are a special kind of beast, right? So they don't
But
like.
now I have a serious question. As in, now you suggested we usually go with both the languages in a code example, right? But according to the best practices, like in general in the code practice, we should either have the code example in YAML or JSON. So
Yeah.
which would you suggest we go with?
As you prefer, this can be actually interchangeably. Like the code could detect, like, is it YAML? Then okay, put it on the YAML tab. Is it JSON? Then put it on the JSON tab. So you could write it in.
No, I mean for our documentation purposes, when me or anyone from the team. Okay.
Yeah, documentation is not a static document. It's a website, right? So it has React components capable of detect if it's YAML or if it's JSON, and then putting things in the right place, independently of what you wrote initially.
Got it. Makes sense. All right. Next question, Pritesh.
So that's all from my end. Otherwise, I keep asking questions in the Slack channel. Mafuza, do you have any other questions? Sorry, Mafuza, do you have any questions?
No.
Rohit?
All right. So now I'll catch you guys up on the discussion we had earlier regarding the interactive learning path that we are coming up with. So when I was asking Fran what approach do you think we should take, or what are the topics that we need to cover, Fran asked me an important question. Who's exactly your target audience? As in, is it the users, adoption, or contributors? Because his point was that majority of the people who even come to async API to contribute, more often than not, they know their way around code and programming, but they're not so acquainted with the fundamentals of EDA or async API, so to say. So we have two target audience, and he asked me if it was users or contributors, because, and the point is, uh, either of the target audience, the basics are going to be the same. So we would essentially be covering the same topics in a manner. But what Franz said was, go with a use case scenario, as in we tell the story and take the interactive learning path such that we teach the user as to not just the concept, but as to how and where the concept is implemented. Like, yeah, the user knows what the concept of server is. The user knows how we can, instantiate a server, but you need to teach you need to help understand the user how a server comes in handy and when it's supposed to be implemented. That is more required, and it would be better from at least from translation that, having our examples or use cases one step above our documentation, because the rationale behind that is we already have concepts bucket, we already have reference, which means probably a developer or a user, uh, who can, well, pretty much read, they can go, if they need a certain understanding of a concept, they can read the documentation. They don't necessarily have to take the learning path, right? So we need to provide that additional value by keeping the use cases a step higher than the documentation that we will have available, so that we are giving them more use cases to work with. So this was like a short brief of the discussion we've had. And yeah, I think Fran will come up. I mean, he will shed some light on what are the topics that we need to cover and how deep. But that's that. Do you have any questions regarding them?
So even during our weekly meetings, we mentioned that interlinking the documents we have already, which are concepts which are frankly very well written. If you go to the website and read concepts that are well written, but we could always link our courses and our documentation. But
Mhm.
the problem with, I personally feel the problem with focusing on two folks or two user groups would be because people who already know maintainers and who are just coming for concepts, they would probably find it more way easier and not up to the standard they would accept than someone who's just coming as a newbie or a rookie or a fresher
Mhm.
to async API. That is my only concern, that the people who are maintainers who know async API, they might not be so sure with concepts. They might find the course a little too basic or rudimentary. That is my only concern. Apart from that, I think it's a great idea to link
But
documentation in courses.
but my argument to that is not an argument, but my counterpoint to that is we are indeed making 100 level learning path, right? Like, this is not meant to be exactly for an advanced user to begin with. Yeah, it's like beginner and mid level, if I'm not wrong. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's the beginner and mid level. And this is definitely not going to be the only learning path that's going to come out. We probably have another one coming out next year, which means like we still have work to do and more courses to put out. Uh, so yeah, that is my point. So still, you think still a bad idea, or what do you think?
I mean, we can obviously try and check. It's always better to give it
Fran
a
was mentioning
swirl
this.
and then see.
Fran was mentioning that you should think about the user. They are often more developer focused, and as to how we can push this learning path out and make it a good one. But to really put out a good one, he mentioned that you should really think from the user's perspective, what they need, what are the problems that they address, like they need to be addressed. His point was that people don't really come to learn async API because they want to learn about async API, but because they just have some task that needs to be done. Like, they need some work to be done with async API. So they want to know the implementation and the use cases more than the actual understanding of every component of async API, which actually made sense to me.
Any comments from?
Sorry. So yeah, actually, it's pretty much that. Like, it happens to us, to all of us, quite often, that we we create that bubble for us, right? Like in between the contributors and so on. And then it's like we're focused in fulfilling our needs, our own needs. Like we want documentation. We're gonna create a bunch of the documentation that we're happy with. We're gonna create a tool. Cool. I'm gonna create this tool that I will be happy with. But how often do we go and ask to the end users and say, hey, what do you have in, like, what are you actually trying to do with async API? Why are you using async API in first place, right? Like what's your use case? Like everybody comes with a use case or with multiple use cases, right? But at least one in mind, right? Usually the most common is I want to document this API. I want to document an API and I have no other tool, or I've heard that async API could fit my needs perfectly, right? So, but let's put everyone in context here. Like, I'm a developer working in a company. I have to document my API. I'm in a sprint of 2 weeks, right? Because we're doing Scrum or whatever other variant of it. I have to deliver some work, right? And the work itself is not do something with async API, right? So the work itself is document this API, or create this portal, or create this API because it doesn't exist yet. So what's the best way for me to do this? And then they find or they hear about async API. Now, the thing is that I want to document this API. And you're telling me that I have to learn a whole new spec that is it's impossible for me to digest in the next 2 weeks. And then probably what I will do in this case is I don't care. If all I have is this, then I'm gonna document the API myself manually. I'm gonna create some markdown and I'm gonna just document it myself because it's always easier than having to learn this huge spec, right? Or something that usually happens is they come to Slack and start asking, like, hey, how can I do this? How can I do that, right? Trying to overcome that problem that even though they have the documentation, even though they have the reference, yeah, you're not gonna read that huge reference just to document an API because it's gonna take you a while, right? And not just a while, but it's not always gonna be easy to figure out what everything is about, right? Or what each part of the spec is talking about. So it's not
the context.
yeah,
The
you want to
context will be different.
basically. So in my opinion, if you want people to get into or in my opinion, from what I see is in KPI right now, the current state is that we have reference, which is pretty good in case you want to learn, like so you know what, the message object has this list of properties. I don't remember which property was that. I'm gonna check. You go there and check. So it can be a string. It has summary and description. Cool. So I'm gonna use summary and description, whatever. You go there and figure out yourself that property, or if there's something that can serve you there. But the bigger context here will be like, how do I know in first place that I have to write a channel? How do I know in first place that I have to write a message? How do I know? How do I write a message? In first place, like, how do I model my data and so on? And even if after I have that, like, what do I do with this? Like, how do I generate documentation as well, right? So I now have the document, but yeah, specifically about the document itself, how do I know what I have to type? Think about it in terms of programming. When you were starting with programming, I'm sure that everybody taught you what a variable is, what a loop is, what an if statement is, a function, and so on, right? All right, so I'm giving you the if, the function, the loops, and so on. Go and build a website. No idea where to start, right? Like, when do I have to start? When do I have to use the function, the if statement, the loop? How is this things all stitching together? I know every little piece of content of concepts, right? I know all these concepts, what everything is doing, but I don't know how to put them together to do what I want to do, right? And even more, like in the first days of or months of programming, they ask you to, I don't know, for an exercise like convert this number to Roman numbers, right? Something like that.
Prime numbers.
Yeah. So how do I convert this? Where do I start? You know all the concepts, you know the if statements, functions, and so on, but you don't know how to put it together. So that's my point. So we need to show people examples of how you do certain things. How do you document an API, a REST API maybe, simple REST API, or a Kafka API, or a WebSocket API. Going beyond documentation, how do you generate code? How do you write the types for your, how do you generate the classes for your code with Modelina, for instance, and so on, right? So, but it doesn't matter if it's with Modelina or what. Like, I just want my, the output, I want the output of my action, I want it to be what I need. I want the code, I want the docs, I want something. And I can give you a huge range of use cases that people are often asking about when they come to async API. So, I'm sorry. So, yeah, let's not focus so much in the tool itself. If it's Modelina, if it's traits, if it's a JSON schema or what, but instead it's like, what is the need that the user is having? What problem are they trying to solve? Right, and what are the most common problems they face, right? And we'll find more in the future. So as we keep finding new problems, we can keep adding new tutorials on how to approach this. And then the user only have to go there and follow one of them that is more or less what they need, and just adapt here and there. And that's how probably they get to write their first async API document quickly and with a purpose, like they feel value on it, right? So, and you guide them, basically, you guide them towards having their first async API file and their first docs as well, and their first code or whatever. But effectively, they adopt async API because it's being useful for them, right? So that, in my opinion, like, we have the reference, we have the concepts, we're doing a pretty good job at explaining the basics and the foundational. We're missing something, in my opinion, something higher level, like something, you know, thinking on the user problems, not on our problems, right? So that's mainly the feedback. Don't know if it should be a tutorial, if it's a guide, I don't know. I honestly don't mind. That's up to you guys. Like, I don't know how you categorize this, but yeah, that's what I'm missing so far.
Interesting. I think we'll still have further discussion about this, because we need to talk to Alejandra about it, and then we can decide if this is gonna be like totally on the use case oriented side, or we still gonna introduce concepts or not. We'll definitely
I agree with Fran, because since I work a little with OpenAPI, and OpenAPI is the main use case for OpenAPI is documenting APIs, right? So you have a use case and you follow that use case and you get to your end goal. It can be something similar with async API, although in Spec 3 we are trying to move away from OpenAPI somewhat, according to what folks told me. But still having a use case which is predominantly used. For example, documenting event-driven APIs is a really great use case, which I feel a lot of folks might be using. Because to do it manually, if you are doing things manually, then what's the point of being a developer, right? That's a point. But so that's a great idea, and I think even in our discussions we mentioned it to Alejandro that the use case or something towards the end of the would be really great, so people can bring in all the information they have and try to implement it. So that's a great suggestion. And
makes sense. So as I said, like use case is probably the best approach because it also gives you hands-on experience. So now the question would be, what are the use cases that we really will really be covering, and to what extent? Because use cases is like a vast ocean. We can't really dive into all of them and cover each of them either. And in the meanwhile, I also see we have Alexander joining the call. Hey. Alexander, do you have any questions?
Hi. Yes. No, no. I just listening. No, no problem. I want to contribute later.
So, could you speak up a little clearer? No. Alexander, could you like speak up a little and a little clearer? Like we were unable to hear you.
I think he
Uh,
told
all right,
it's
all
all
right,
right.
got it. Yeah, that's all right.
So if no one has any more questions, then maybe we can stop the meeting and give everyone some time back.
Yeah,
But if you have any questions,
as I don't have any
there is.
questions on my end. So as Alexander would say, we can get 15 minutes of our life back to us.
Yeah, no, because I'm here, so I'm gonna extend this beyond the 15 minutes. Just real quick, like so something that
Yeah,
we've been noticing. When I say we, is Lucas and I, we've been noticing lately, is that we should probably change the communication strategy on Async API because we're coming from OpenAPI, right? So I created Async API as an OpenAPI alternative for other protocols and for event-driven architectures. But as RDS said, it's like this is mainly documentation. It was my use case at the time as well. And so what happens is that all the messaging, let's say if you land in the website, first thing you find is an example. The animation is an example of an Async API file. And on the right side, you see the documentation that is being generated because of this Async API file. So everything seems to speak to the user and say, hey, this is for generating documentation, like Async API is for documentation. And that is a poor use case. Like it's I will probably never recommend anyone to use Async API or OpenAPI if you're only doing it for documentation, because that's a pain to maintain, right? Like if you have to maintain a documentation that is created with an Async API file, then go ahead and maintain it just in Markdown, and you write your own or HTML or whatever. So if you're using the spec, it's because you have a better purpose for it. Like you have another, you have a better value to get from it. So document, like let's say for instance, some people are using Async API to configure their infrastructure. So an example, if I add a new channel to my Async API file, there is a CI process somewhere catching this change and creating a new Kafka topic in the broker, provisioning a new Kafka topic or something like that. If I remove it, it removes the Kafka topic and things like that. So it's like automatically configuring and provisioning infrastructure based on the Async API file, right? So other people are using it to generate code. For instance, we are showcasing what's possible if you use a framework that is aware of Async API, like Glee, right? So Glee is a framework that is aware of Async API, and it uses Async API as a config file, right? So so the way it works is that if you unlike traditional frameworks where they are not aware of Async API at all, you have the code and you have the docs generated by Async API. At some point, what people do is they start touching the code, evolving the code, and they forget to update the async API file. And what happens is that the documentation is then outdated and not telling the truth. And so what happens over time is that someone gets tired of maintaining this and they drop async API or they drop OpenAPI because it's a hell of a pain to maintain this, right? So if you have something like Glee, or if we integrate tighter with the existing frameworks, so they become async API aware, what happens is that the framework uses the async API file to understand where to send the messages, where to subscribe, and all this stuff. And if you remove it from the async API file, then your code doesn't work, right? So it's more tight, let's say, together. So this way, you're forced to update the async API file in order to make your code work. So now this example, together with the infrastructure provisioning and all of that, are making a good use case, right? But as a side effect, and I want to reinforce this side effect, right? As a side effect, it happens that you get really good documentation automatically generated, right? So it's like, oh, this is cool. But documentation shouldn't be the end goal. Documentation is an easy side effect that you should get, right? But it shouldn't be the end goal here. But instead of communicating it like this, we are reversing the message, and because it's easier, right? So we're showing people, hey, you see, you can get documentation quickly, and you can get more stuff. But usually people don't get to this more stuff. They stop at documentation and they think it's a documentation framework or a documentation tool, right? When it's not, right? Even though you can, but it's not the purpose. So the reason I'm saying this is that probably at some point, and this is something that we have to discuss as a community, of course, we should be changing the message and how we communicate also in the docs. So showcasing in the docs, we should be showcasing that, you know what, you can generate code, or you can not generate, because generate is a bad word here, but you can create your first service, right? Or you can create your service using Glee or using any other tool together with async API, right? And you'll get your service quickly up and running in minutes, right? Super easy. You know what? And you get documentation as well for free. So documentation and code are going to be always up to date. No more that problem, right? No more need to maintain the documentation as a separate thing. It could actually be generated in a CI process. The documentation might be generated automatically by a CI/CD script and deployed somewhere else. So that's I have my daughter saying like so yeah. So that's and I lost track of everything, of course. So yeah, I just wanted to comment that maybe the documentation should be one place to for us to change that message as well, and to convey that message as well, like, hey, that this is not just for documentation. So yeah, just wanted you to be aware of that. Nothing, no further action required from now. So yeah. Unless you want to take further action, of course, but I think you're busy with stuff, with the documentation stuff.
I think we have our hands full for now, probably going forward. So does anybody else have any questions, or are you calling it a day today?
Just if you are feeling shy communicating right now, you can reach out in the Slack channel. A lot of folks reply there as well. So if you feel shy talking about it, right? Because I felt shy when I was beginning with async API. So the Slack channels are a really great way to seek help, ask for topics, ask how to do things. So if you feel shy talking, just async API, Slack channel works as well. And we'll try to help you.
Also, for what it's worth, I still remember the first time I joined the Spec 3.0 meeting. Yeah, everything just went up like this from my head. So it's all right if you feel overwhelmed or you feel like you don't understand anything. just reach out to any one of us, or in general, ping us in any of the channels. There are many people out there to help you and get you started. Shouldn't really be a problem. All right, Ritesh, I think you can wrap it off.
Yep. All right. So 8 minutes back to everyone. Thank you for joining in, and hopefully we see you back in the next Doc3 meeting. Bye bye. Have a great
All
day.
right,
Yeah.
bye bye,
Bye-bye.
guys.